Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Andi Kurniawan. First of all, I will say thank you to my supervisors and the examiner who will watch my video presentation about my thesis with the title The Correlation Between EFL Learners' Motivation and Their Speaking Skills. Okay, in this section, I will explain Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Chapter 4, Findings and Discussion. Findings. According to the research method, in order to gain the data, the researcher used the questionnaire to know the motivation in learning speaking skills. And then the researcher used the oral test to know speaking skill of the students. After data collected, the researcher analyzed all of the data firstly, and secondly, the researcher analyzed motivation and speaking skill to know the correlation between them using formula of correlation and product moment by person with SPSS version 24. You can see the findings as shown below. EF Miller's motivation, as mentioned in the data analysis, the questionnaire has 30 items. The researcher was used the questionnaire from the previous writer. You can see the table classification of motivation and learning speaking skill. As shown in the table, there were one student got very high category, 41 students got high category, and 4 students got average category for motivation and learning speaking skill. And then the total student mean score and standard deviation of motivation in learning speaking skill, it showed that total mean score of the student was 75.36 and the standard deviation was 5.615. From the means of the score student motivation and learning speaking skill, it can be concluded that motivation of EFL learners in learning speaking skill got high category. The second, EFL learners speaking skills. In this research, speaking skill was obtained through oral tests to know the speaking skill of the student. The oral test evaluated by 3 categories like accuracy, fluency, and comprehensibility. To know the score of speaking skill of the student using Hasil scales. And then the classification table of the student score below. As shown on the table, there 2 students got excellent category, 8 students got very good category, and 24 students got good category, and 12 students got fairly good category for speaking ability. And then the total student mean score and standard deviation of speaking skill in oral tests show from the mean score of the student, it can be concluded that speaking skill of the student got good category. And the main focus of the research is to know the correlation between them. Okay, the correlation between EFL motivation and the speaking skills. The findings of the questionnaire about motivation and oral test to know the speaking skill of the student were analyzed using SPSS version 24 to see the correlation between 2 variables. You can see the correlation result between motivation and speaking skills. As shown in the table, the fail of the person correlation between motivation and speaking skill show the correlation coefficient is 0.690. It can be concluded that correlation between 2 variables is high correlation, and then the significant value is 0, which means that the correlation is significant. It believes that motivation of the student will affect in learning speaking skills. And the next, regression result. The researcher utilized SPSS version 24 to investigate the contribution of the motivation of the EFL learners in learning speaking skill. The researcher present the result in the table below. As shown in the table, the correlation coefficient is 0.690 and the determination coefficient is 0.477. It can be concluded that contribution of motivation as independent variable for the EFL learners in learning speaking skill, especially in the second semester student in English education study program, is 47.7%. And the next is hypothesis testing. The correlation coefficient between 2 variables is error count 0.690. Okay, based on the table, it can be seen that significance value is 0. It's less than 0.05, which means null hypothesis is rejected and alternative hypothesis is accepted. As the conclusion, it can be shown that the EFL motivation and the speaking skill have a significant relation. Okay, next is discussion. The discussion presents the interpretation of the research result. This research is focusing to know the correlation between EFL motivation and their speaking skill that has conducted at the second semester student in English Education Study Program, Faculty of Language and Literature, State University of Makassar. Based on the result of the research in terms of EFL learners' motivation, it's known the level of the motivation of the EFL learners in learning speaking skill is the high category. It showed that the total mean score of the student motivation from the questionnaire was 75.39 and standard deviation was 5.615. There were one student got very high category, 41 student got high category, and 4 students got average category. Motivation is a necessary aspect to do any activities in order to be success. It can guide the individuals to make a decision for the achieve their goal and fulfill their expectation. A student motivation in learning speaking skill can be influenced by 4 motivations, namely intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, integrative motivation, and instrumental motivation. Instrumental motivation is defined as doing an activity for its inherent satisfaction rather than some separable consequence. The second is extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is a development that relies whenever an activity is done in order to gain some separable outcomes. The third is integrative motivation. Integrative motivation needs to know the target language culture they are learning and thus need to learn as much as possible about its culture, history, society, and are curious about everything related. And the last is instrumental motivation. Instrumental motivation of the student is they want to study language because of a practical reason about getting a salary or bonus and getting into college. Okay, the next is in part of speaking skill. For the speaking skill of the student is known that classification, the speaking skill of the EFL learners is good category. On a very poor, fairly good, very good, and excellent range. It showed that the total mean score of the students speaking skill from the oral test was 82.13 and standard deviation was 5.479. There are 2 students got excellent category, 8 students got very good category, 24 students got good category, and the last 12 students got fairly good category for their speaking skill. Okay, the speaking skill is one of the most important skill to mastery for your language or English. Learning speaking skill can make the students share their own idea or feelings, and the aspect should, in order to master speaking skill, you should be many. Now the aspect in learning speaking skill, there are accuracy, fluency, and comprehensibility. Accuracy. Accuracy is related to the correct sentence in pronunciation, grammar, or vocabulary that can be understood by listener without confusing grammar. Fluency. Fluency is an important role to influence student speaking skill. The speaker, when he wants to speak comfortably to maintain his image in public or must consider its effectiveness or impact on the listener. And last is comprehensibility. Comprehensibility is the path to understanding the expression sent by speaker to the listener. And then the correlation between motivation and speaking skill using SPSS version 24. Correlation coefficient is 0.690, which revealed there was a correlation between motivation and speaking skill of the second semester student in English Education Study Program, and the criteria of the correlation considered high correlation. It can be concluded that correlation level of 2 variables was high. And then the result of the correlation coefficient between motivation and speaking skill was 0.690, have high correlation. Speaking skill can help students in learning foreign language. They will use they will use for communicating or giving information to the listener. Students who have good speaking skill will easily follow the lesson, but speaking skill becomes challenge for the EFL learners to develop it. Learners should have much time to learn and practice, and then Yani, Fajrina, and Hanifa argue that speaking foreign language is difficult skill mastered by EFL learner. Learner consider the speaking skill is not easy because it will take a great preparation and courage to good speaking on the foreign language. The important role of EFL learners to develop their speaking skill can be influenced by internal factors and external factors of the individual. Brown in Mirhadisade formulate the individual factors influence the language learning such as motivation, attitude, personal practice, and study habits. Motivation as essential factor for student learning process because of motivation is most psychologically factor to success in learning. It also helps the student decide what they want, what they have stored in their mind, what they can do, and they and what skill they want to learn in target language. Uh, it can be concluded that students learn English based on motivation, which has differently by every learner. The next is by chapter 5, conclusion and suggestion. For the For the conclusion, from the result of the data, the main focus in this research is to find out the correlation between EFLers motivation and their speaking skill. It shows the classification of EFLers motivation and their speaking skills. Thus, both of the data obtained from the questionnaire and then the correlation coefficient between motivation and speaking skill is 0.690. It concludes there are high correlation between motivation and speaking skill of the second semester student in English study program. Therefore, the significance correlation is significant because the less than 0.05 and coefficient determination is 0.477 from SPSS version 24. That indicates the contribution of motivation in learning speaking skill is 47.7%. Speaking skill is one of the most important skills in learning foreign language because it becomes a part of teaching and learning. To master speaking skill, it should be have good knowledge of words, know the element of speaking, and learn to speak as often as possible. Effort to the student study English basically speaking skill can be influenced by several factors. The findings of the research motivation can give impact for the student in learning speaking skill. Most students have high motivation in learning speaking skill from the result of the research. This shows the role of motivation as one of the most important factors in learning. Almost of the students with high motivation in learning speaking have good speaking skill too. It indicates the students who have high motivation can get better results for their speaking skill. Suggestion. There are several suggestions based on the findings of the research will provide for the lecturer and student. For the first is for the lecturer. Lecturer has an important role in teaching and learning. Lecturers should motivate the student in learning foreign language, especially part of speaking skill, and then making the comfortable, interesting situation in the classroom. For the students must have motivation to master English, especially speaking skill, because of very important for their study and future life. In order to master speaking skill, the student must pay attention to element of speaking skill. I think that's all for the presentation about my thesis. Thank you very much for watching. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.